right, so we are studying Proverbs. I'm still in Ecclesiastes. Hold on, let me find Proverbs here. Did that work, Levi? Okay. I was going to say, if not, I might have to start responding to text here. All right, so let me get there. Okay. We've been studying Proverbs, and again, we're studying this topically, and we're in our third major section, dealing with work, being industrious, as opposed to being lazy. Of course, there's verses that will deal with diligence, and that's kind of the subsection that we've been in. May finish that tonight, I don't know, we'll see. And then the next subsection will be laziness, slothfulness, however you want to word that. But we left off at 27, chapter 27. Got a couple of passages from chapter 27. The first one being verse 18. Of course, I put these on the screen, but I'll give you a minute to get there, and then, as we always do, we move forward from that spot. 27:18. It says, "Whoso keepeth the fig tree shall eat the fruit thereof. So he that waiteth on his master shall be honored." Well, the idea here is you have a similar idea as that of Deuteronomy 25, verse 4, which is also quoted, by the way, twice in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 9, 1 Timothy 5:18. "Thou shalt not muzzle the ox when it treadeth, or when he treadeth out the corn." A literal meaning here is, in the literal sense, is you take care of if you're tilling the garden, you're pulling the weeds out of the garden, you should get some of the vegetables. If you're tending the fruit tree, you should get to eat some of the fruit. That's sort of the literal idea. But there's also, and certainly the literal idea is there, but I think probably the bigger picture here, the bigger emphasis is this figurative idea. Those who labor on a project, they share in the credit, they share in the fruit of it, and the servant that cares for his master, he's going to be praised, and he's going to share in whatever honor that his master receives. So there's the idea here. I was about to attribute this to the wrong source. It's Jamieson Fawcett Brown commentary says, "Diligence secures a reward even for the humble servant." I like that. That's a pretty succinct way to say what this verse is saying. Diligence will secure a reward even for a humble servant. All right, let's go to same chapter here. Just down a few verses to 23. And really it's 23 through 27. Here's what the King James says: "Be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds. For riches are not forever, and doth the crown endure to every generation? The hay appeareth, and the tender grass showeth itself, and herbs of the mountains are gathered. The lambs are for thy clothing, and the goats are the price of the field. And thou shalt have goats' milk enough for thy food, for the food of thy household, and for the maintenance for thy maidens." But here you have a lesson from rural life. The harvest of hay that is, if it's properly timed, you harvest that hay. That'll feed your lambs, it'll feed your goats. And then your lambs and your goats are going to provide wool. They're going to provide milk, money, income. And then that'll be used for purchasing more land, clothing, use it to feed your family, take care of your family, and so on. Adam Clark says in his commentary, the idea is also not simply trusting the shepherd without having some oversight of things yourself. Do you know what's going on in your business? In other words, sometimes there are two extremes that people tend to go to, right? Some people will just sort of, you can get to the point where you micromanage everything, and it becomes difficult to accomplish at least as much as you could, because you got to have your hands right in everything, and you can micromanage to the point that it hinders productivity and even profitability, at least, again, more profitability. But the other extreme would be that you just you don't even know what's going on. And, have you ever seen that situation? It might be in a corporation, it might be in a small company, and there's somebody that's just, they're just making a mess of it. And you're thinking, maybe it might even be that the owner, and you're like, I know this guy would not be okay with this, but how does he not know this? How's he not aware? I was talking to somebody recently about a franchise-type restaurant that had been not treating the customers very well. And I said something in that situation we were talking about it, some of us, and I said, I can't imagine that it was a franchise. I said, I can't imagine that the franchise owner knows about that. He would be happy about that. And I'm not saying he's too hands-off or not. I don't know. But sometimes it might, again, you can't always know, especially if you got a big corporation. It's hard to know every single thing. But that seems to be at least some of the idea here is what's going on with your business, with your stuff. And so I think that is at least a partial lesson here. But I think the main lesson is to be diligent, to be wise in your planning, and the idea being so as to take proper care of your assets, because they are temporary and sometimes they're very fragile, and that's kind of the idea there in the beginning of this text. Alden, in his little commentary, says, healthy animals, productive fields, timely harvesting, and judicious use of its yield all require wisdom, which, of course, is what Proverbs is all about. And then, of course, there's the concept here of perpetuating wealth. You're perpetuating wealth by means of flocks and herds, as opposed to just, you got some money. That's so temporary. But the idea of flocks and herds is going to perpetuate. They're going to have more, and you can use that. And so it's kind of, there's a lot really going on in this passage, a lot of lessons, but a lot of it seems to center around that main lesson: diligence, wisdom in your planning and use of what you have, taking proper care of assets, and that involves a lot of diligence, and thus we included in this little subsection. You can't just take a hands-off approach and think that, things are just going to take care of themselves. It's not. That's just not how life works. I don't care if it's business or whatever it might be. Most things don't just take care of themselves. All right, so Proverbs 28. Let's go to chapter 28. This next one is in verse 19. He that tilleth his land shall have plenty of bread, but he that followeth after vain persons shall have poverty enough. There's the same verb is used in both phrases here. The diligent will be filled. The same verb is used in the Hebrew, is what I'm trying to say. The diligent will be filled with food, with wealth, and the follower of vanity also will be filled. But he's going to be filled with poverty. So that's the idea. It's quite similar to chapter 12, verse 11. He that tilleth his land shall be satisfied with bread, but he that followeth vain persons is void of understanding. We talked about this verse, or at least the similarity between them, when we covered that one. All right, let's go on to chapter 30. As always, jump in if you have a comment. Just holler at me or whatever. If I move too quickly, if you got a comment or something, a question, something to add, whatever. Chapter 30, verse 24. Well, again, this got kind of a range here, 24 through 28. He says, there be four things which are little upon the earth, but they are exceeding wise. The ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their meat in the summer. The conies are but a feeble folk, yet they make their houses in the rocks. The locusts have no king, yet go they forth, all of them by bands. The spider taketh hold with her hands, and is in kings' palaces. Well, you probably noticed if you were following, if you got a New King James, or if you have a ESV, or if you're just following on the screen there's some difference. Some of these critters are not the easiest to determine what they are, and you'll see that if you're ever reading, especially passages. Just recently in my daily reading, I was coming across in Leviticus where it's talking about clean animals and unclean. And some of those, you're just kind of like, what? And then if you ever read like ESV, sometimes they're very different. And sometimes it's just hard to tell for sure exactly what some of these animals are. Ants, that one's pretty easy to figure out. And I've got this note under Proverbs 6 when we get to the subsection on laziness, but I'll go ahead and mention it now. Ants are only mentioned twice in Scripture. And they're both right here in Proverbs, chapter 6, 6 through 11, and here in 30, verses 24 and 25. And each time, both times that they're mentioned in Scripture, they're used to illustrate industry, hard work, diligence, and here they're used as something that's kind of, well, they're amazing, they're exceedingly wise, even though they're so tiny. And in chapter 6, they're going to be used to say to the lazy man, hey, you need to take a lesson from these critters, because they could teach you a lot if you're having trouble with, you're struggling with being lazy. But here he says 4 things that are little on the earth, but they are exceedingly wise. Well, wisdom, sometimes a lot of wisdom, big wisdom can be packaged in a very small critter. It has nothing to do with the size of a person or an animal. But here are these 4 things that they are exceedingly wise, as he puts it there in the New King James Version. But he says the ants, they're a people not strong. Well, there's nothing just, to us, we'll say, well, an ant's not that strong. But they prepare their food in the summer. They're ready when the winter comes, right? Why? Because of their diligence, and they've prepared. Then he says, again, King James has conies. Here you see the New King James has rock badgers. ESV has the same thing. There's a footnote there. Hyraxes. It seems to be some kind of a similar to a rabbit or coney, as we would say, that lives up in, not like in a meadow, but more in the mountains. And that's why it says they make their homes in the crags or in the cliffs, ESV has. Well, there's nothing especially strong about them or whatever, but they live in seemingly impossible places. Seems here that there's a lesson of improvising, even in difficult situations. What do we do when we face a difficult situation? You could just give up. And again, you can see the contrast, diligence and laziness. The lazy person just says, well, we tried. You just give up. The diligent person says, okay, well, we've encountered a challenge here, but you know what? Let's figure out how we make this work. So you have these rock badgers, conies, or however you want to word that. Then you got the locusts. There's no question here. This one is, as far as I've seen, is across the board. It's easier to translate locust. But they don't have a king, yet they all advance in ranks. Even without a king, they march and they conquer. It seems to be here a lesson of unity, harmony, cooperation. I mean, if there's some pretty amazing videos out there, by the way. You can go like to YouTube or something and see like swarms of locusts, and it is that has to be terrifying to experience live. I mean, and I've seen one or two of those, and I think to myself, like, wow, can you imagine being in Egypt when those things came through with the plague? Ooh, man. But unity, harmony, cooperation. They work together, even without a king. Nobody's cracking a whip. They just go. This next animal is probably the most difficult one to translate. King James has it as spider. I don't know if I've seen another translation that has it as the spider. I mean, besides King James and New King James, as spider. Most will have something like, you see lizard there in the ESV, and I think that might be the footnote here in the New King James. Is it a lizard? Is it a spider? Most that I've seen, most commentators or whatever, that they tend to say that, and I certainly don't claim to be any kind of an expert in Hebrew, but they say spider's probably not the best. But the idea here is, I put in my notes either way. If it is a spider, it seems to be a lesson of persistence. I've got a sermon. I preached it here at Bremen in, I think, 2013 or so. I meant to look it up and see when it was. I feel like it was not long after we came to Bremen. But, you remember, you could probably give us the points and everything, right? So I preached this, I think it was pretty soon after I came here, but I've used it several different places. But I got it from, I think it was one of those I got from Brother Travis Connor. Gail and Ken, they know Travis. And when my grandmother Dollahite, she lived in Gadsden, and she would go just about every single week to Sneed, Alabama, to the Antioch congregation Sunday evening. She'd be at her home congregation Sunday morning. Sunday night, she was at Aunt Bee's house. That was her sister. And she would stay at Aunt Bee's until usually Wednesday afternoon, and then she'd go home. But she would collect. Brother Travis always had like a handout, full-page handout, outline type thing. And she collected those, and sometimes I'd see her when I was in preaching school, and she'd hand me just a stack of those. And I'd go through them, and one of them that caught my attention was things that are little. And it was from this text. And so kind of went through some of the same stuff we're looking at here, looking at lessons that we can learn from things that are little. Y'all don't remember that. I should probably preach that again sometime. So if it's the spider, it seems to be a lesson of persistence. And one of the things that I talked about in that is the spider, and you know this if you've ever been around spiders or I think in terms of those, does anybody know what kind of spider it is that they build those like magnificent webs that are like really big a lot of times? What'd you call it? Golden orb weaver. Yeah, I think that does sound familiar because somebody was telling me one time. But yeah, they make these massive, and they're just beautiful. And yeah, they're pretty good sized spiders. They're very scary looking spiders. Yeah, all spiders. There's not a spider that's not scary looking as far as I'm concerned. I agree with that. But if you ever see one of those, sometimes you'll see them and they'll span like a pretty wide area. And we've come out, like a lot of times they build them just, I guess it's like overnight. Just sometimes you come out in the morning, there's this, I've walked before coming from the house to the church building in the morning, and there'll be one across this little, where you pull under the awning. It'll be like from the building to one of those poles. I mean, massive, or sometimes it'll be like kind of up to the ceiling, maybe not covering that entire area. But you go by and you're going to swipe it out of the way. And sometimes they'll go somewhere else and build, but I have seen them, almost immediately start working right back on it again. And next thing you know, give them a little bit of time, and what? They've rebuilt that web. That's, persistence. Diligence. You swipe away a spider's web, they don't say, you know what, I have built this web 4 times this week, and I am sick of this. I quit. They don't do that. They're just going to build it right back. And they're just, there's a lesson there in diligence, persistence. Now, if this critter is better rendered lizard, and again, those who know a lot more about it than I do say that's probably the better rendering, something like that, then the lesson here would probably be more something along the lines of the reward for diligence, the reward for humble service. And notice he says the lizard, you can take in your hands. A little gecko or something like that, you can just hold them right in your hands. Yet, it's in king's palaces. So he's living in places that, and by the way, he's living in places without bribery, without deceitfulness, trying to pull strings or something like that. He's living in places that you and I, most of us, we could work our entire lifetime. We could live our entire lifetime and not be in those places. And so, again, the reward for diligence and humble service. By the way, both spiders and lizards, what do they tend to eat? Bugs, insects. And so, there you go. It's a humble job, but it's of great value to humanity. And so the idea here seems to be, do your best. Be diligent. And there's a reward for that. Here's a lizard that you could take in your hands. He just goes about his business. He's eating those insects. And he's living in places that most of us will never attain. So great lessons from things that are little. Anything else on that? Let's go to Proverbs 31. You can't talk about diligence without talking about this worthy woman, the virtuous wife, the worthy woman, the woman who fears the Lord, the ESV has it. We won't read every single verse of this. We've got probably several of them here. I'm going to start at, of course, verse 10, who can find a virtuous wife, who can find a virtuous woman, the King James says. But let's pick up at verse 13 for our purposes here. She seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. She's like the merchant's ships. She bringeth her food from afar. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. She considereth the field, and buyeth it. With the fruit of her hands she planteth a vineyard. She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. Well, here you see her diligence, this worthy woman's diligence in work, caring for her family, helping to provide for her family. She's not buying clothing that's just ready-made. She's getting the raw materials and making clothing. You see that there in verse 13? And, if she buys something for her family, she's going to sell something or things sufficient to pay for that. She's mindful of the outgoing versus the incoming. Adam Clark puts it this way: if she imports, she exports. In other words, she's not going to spend more than she's making, or more than the family's bringing in. So she buys something for the family, she's going to sell sufficient to pay for it. That's verse 14, by the way. If she imports, she exports. Verse 15, she's diligent in even getting up before daylight many times. She's diligent in real estate for a growing family, verse 16. That could be for planting. That could be for the growing family that's going to expand as children grow. It could be that there's going to be more children. Of course, anticipating children growing up. They may get married, have families of their own. A lot of times families would live together, very extended family living in that same area. So it might be that that's kind of what she's thinking in this. But real estate for a growing family, verse 16. And, of course, utilizing that also there in verse 16. Diligence in producing quality products, verses 18 and 19. She perceives her merchandise is good. She's not arrogant. She's not being prideful about it, but she knows good and well that she's making a quality product because she's giving diligence to do so. So her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. That could be a literal reference. Like sometimes she's pulling an all-nighter working on these things. Might be that it's a reference just simply hyperbole to say that she's always working is how we might use that, using that exaggeration or hyperbole. She lays her hands to the spindle, her hands hold the distaff again. Just diligence here all around in her work. He goes on to say, verses 21 and 22, she's not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. The word that is rendered scarlet here, what is that, verse 21, it's a cognate of a word that means double. And so scarlet, the idea there, scarlet being double dyed, twice dyed. So you see that idea there. And so it's very similar to the word for double. And the reason pointing that out is it seems the meaning intended here is not so much she clothes her house with scarlet. It seems that what he's intending to say is she clothes her family with double. And that's part of why that makes more sense is when you look at she's not afraid of what? The snow for her household. Why? Because they're clothed with double layer. You know, sometimes we'll even say that, layer up. And so her household, they don't have to worry about snow. Now, Palestine doesn't see a lot of snow, but there were times when they would get that. At the very least, they're going to get cold weather. She's not worried about that. She's going to make sure her family, husband, children are covered with an extra layer for the cold. That seems that makes the most sense is what's being intended there. And I don't even know that I remembered. I meant to check and see. Oh, there is a footnote in the ESV. Double thickness, yeah. So, all right, same chapter here, 24. She maketh fine linen and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. She not only clothes those of her own household, but she's also making clothing to sell. Well, I mean, again, going back to verse, what was it, 18. She perceives that her merchandise is good. She's diligent. She makes quality clothing, so she's going to clothe her household, but she's also, turn around, she'll sell that to others to help support the family. 31:27, same chapter here, verse 27. She looketh well to the ways of her household and eateth not the bread of idleness. She diligently tends to her home, to her household affairs. And look, she just has too much to do to be idle or lazy. And so this is a woman that is industrious. It's not to say that she doesn't know how and when to take a moment of rest and to recover some strength. But she is the farthest thing from a lazy person. Just doesn't have time to be lazy. All right, anything else on those? We made better time than I thought to that. I was afraid we wouldn't get through that. All right, let's go into the next subsection here. That's the last one on the section of diligence, or subsection of diligence. I said this last week, diligence, laziness, there's, obviously polar opposites. This section could have been one subsection and just call it diligence / laziness, I suppose. But anyway, I separated them. Sometimes hindsight's 20/20, or sometimes you go back and you kind of second guess and say, well, maybe I'd have been better off doing it this way. I don't know. Well, let's go to chapter 6 of Proverbs. As I mentioned before, I've got 4 subsections in this section on work. Diligence, laziness, which is what we're beginning here. Number 3 is honesty in work. And then dependability in work. That'll be the 4th one and the final one. All right, so 6 through 11. King James says, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man." So again, ants are only mentioned in Scripture here and in chapter 30. Both places illustrating diligence, industriousness. And so he's saying here the lazy person could learn a lesson from the ants, essentially. How hard they work, the heavy loads they bear. And again, going back to chapter 30, he says they don't have much strength. Well, that's to us. But for their size, if you've ever maybe seen some of these, might be like a National Geographic thing or something, but for their size, ants are ridiculously strong. I mean, it's amazing. And you would not believe some of the things that ants can accomplish. I had to resist the temptation not to just go chase a rabbit, because there's some videos out there again that you can watch and things you can read that are just, it's amazing like how much they can accomplish. And read about one guy that like he wanted to come up with this plan to like see if he could keep ants from getting to this. Like he put a little sugar water in a bowl or something like that. Might have just been sugar. And then he puts like the bowl on top of a stool, and he's like hanging that stool from the ceiling. I think he put the stool inside a thing of water. It was crazy all that he did. And he left it for a couple of days. He came back, he's just covered in ants. And he had actually set up cameras to record it so he could see how they did it. It was wild. Like I've seen videos where they form like a chain to cross like this, what to them would be this huge chasm. And they somehow managed to cross it, like forming a chain. I mean, it's pretty amazing what ants can accomplish. And it's because of their diligence. And so he says to the lazy man here, look at the ants. We might paraphrase it. Look at the ants, you bum. Take a lesson from them, how hard they work, the heavy loads that they bear, the cooperation, and on we could go. They never seem to rest, unlike the sluggard, who always seems to be resting. I don't know if we could call it rest, more like wasting time. No obvious leaders among the ants. I mean, there's the queen, obviously, but other than that, no real, doesn't seem to be much of a hierarchy or whatever. Yet they function efficiently. They function smoothly. There are no power struggles among ants. They store up food for future use, which is what any sensible, diligent creature would do, right? Verse 9, he sounds almost impatient, this wise man. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? When will you rise from your sleep? You could almost hear, kind of sounds like Daddy sometimes, on some of those summer mornings when school's out and you just get sleep the day away, and Dad's coming in there going, get up. I'm going to just sleep the day away. Sometimes come in, burning daylight. Sounds almost impatient, asking twice here. When are you going to get moving, lazy man? Verse 10, you got the response here. As it seems to me that this is the response of the lazy man. Well, just a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. It may be that this is the wise man saying this, the diligent man saying this kind of mockingly to the lazy man, but it might just as well be that this is the lazy man's response. I mean, you ever been there where, I mean, it may be that you're just genuinely tired, but I think probably most of us have had at least some occasion where we say, well, I was just being a little bit lazy. Maybe you say to somebody who's trying to get you going, just give me another minute. Just give me 5 more minutes. Maybe I'm going to hit that snooze button for the 18th time. Whatever it might be, just a little bit more. And so whether it's him saying that or it's the guy here kind of mockingly saying, oh, yeah, just a little more sleep, just a little more slumber, a little more folding of the hands to sleep. So shall your poverty come. Like a prowler is how the New King James puts it here. What does the ESV have? Like a robber, your want like an armed man. Boy, it's a metaphor here. I guess it'd be more like a simile. That he's saying your poverty is going to come like you've been robbed. But you're not robbed by a robber. You're robbed by your sleep, by your bed. And really we could nuance that a little bit just to say more precisely, you've robbed yourself, he says to that lazy man. You robbed yourself of time, of opportunity, because you were being lazy. Chapters 10 through 29 of the book, by the way, are going to go on to deal quite a bit with this theme of laziness and its counterpart in diligence. Alden makes the point that Proverbs will this is, by the way, this hit me when I was studying this particular passage. And I mean, sometimes you read something and you kind of go, ooh, man. And you feel the sting of a passage of Scripture a little bit more. But Alden says this, and it's true. He says, Proverbs, it often deals very starkly in black and white. And that's part of just the nature of the book, truisms. It's not meant to say that it's always going to be this way. We talked about that last week. The diligent person, he's going to make more money, he's going to get promoted, but it doesn't always work that way, right? Because sometimes can I just say it? I don't think we got kids in here, do we? Sometimes you just got an idiot in charge who promotes the bum or promotes somebody that should never have been promoted. Maybe they're just foolish, maybe they're just dumb, whatever. But the truism is that, you're diligent and it's going to be better for you. So Proverbs deals a lot in black and white, very stark black and white. And you see that here. There's very rarely gray area in the book of Proverbs. Well, again, you see that very strongly here. And this is what he goes on to say. I think I had the quote. Did I write the quote down? Oh, yeah, I did. I just didn't put the quote. I got to go correct that in my notes. I don't have the quotation. I couldn't see it. But here's what he says, and this is where I was kind of like, oh, and I feel the sting of this, and it's easy to dismiss this passage because, as he says, few men may be as lazy as the fellow described here. I mean, have you not ever read this and thought, man, that guy's a bomb? I mean, this guy, yeah. I'm glad I'm not like that. I mean, hey, I don't always do it as well as I should. I realize that, but I'm not like that guy. Proverbs deals in those blacks and whites very strongly a lot of times. He says, few men may be as lazy as the fellow described here, yet few of us work as hard as we should. Don't excuse yourself automatically when reading this passage. Nobody works as hard as an ant. That's very true. And again, it's not to say that just to beat ourselves up, but I'm saying when I read that, I sat there and I thought to myself of the times that I've read this passage and gone like, yeah, man, this guy, he's like next level lazy. Glad I'm not like that. And it's easy just to breeze right over it without stopping to look in the mirror of God's word and say, how can I do better at at learning from the ant myself and being more industrious and trying to take better advantage of opportunities as they present themselves. That was powerful to me. So let's go to chapter 10. I think we can get one more of these, maybe a couple. I don't know. We'll see. 10, 4, and 5. He becometh... Sorry, I got too quick. I heard the pages still turning. He becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. He that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame. Verse 4 is dealing with the diligent worker who is rewarded. Again, you see that black and white. Diligent worker, he's rewarded. Does it ever happen that a diligent worker doesn't get rewarded? That he gets completely overlooked for a promotion or a raise or whatever it might be? Yeah, that does happen sometimes. But the truism is the diligent worker, he gets rewarded for that. And of course, that's contrasted to the lazy worker. Or, I think it's Alden that made the statement, he used the term the clock watcher. And he suffers poverty for that because he's lazy. He's constantly, well, when are we going to get off work? When are we going to get done? Instead of just doing the work and getting done. Verse 5, he says, the one who gathers in summer is a prudent son. He who sleeps in harvest is a son who brings shame. So much of agriculture is about timing. And, I mean, if you sleep during harvest, do you know what you're not doing? Harvesting, that's right. And I was about to say, it's not a trick question. If you sleep during harvest, you are not harvesting. And you miss that opportunity, and you can just miss it, and it's gone. And what are you going to do then? Nothing. You can't. You just have to learn from that mistake and be diligent to plant on time and then harvest on time next season. So much of agriculture is timing, and so it's about opportunity. And that seems to me that's the thrust of verse 5, using opportunities when they're there. Because some opportunities, if you don't grab them, if you don't take advantage of them, that's it, they're gone. You can't get it back. And it's about being alert for the best time, the right time, but even better, the best time to speak, to act, take advantage of those opportunities. All right? Let's go to chapter 12. We'll stop with this one because I don't think that's going to, yeah. Chapter 12, verse 27. The slothful man roasteth not that which he took in hunting, but the substance of a diligent man is precious. I'm not sure. I've taught Proverbs before, but I don't know. I guess I just happened upon a little bit better study of this verse. But it's kind of, there's some obscurity in the Hebrew here, and I've read it before and thought, well, the lazy man doesn't roast what he took in hunting. Well, I mean, it kind of almost makes you wonder, like, well, why would the lazy man even go hunting to begin with? And furthermore, if he got something, why would he not eat it? It might be a reference to wastefulness in that sense, but Adam Clark says the lazy man doesn't roast what he took in hunting precisely because he is lazy, and therefore he has nothing because he didn't go hunting. You can't roast what you took in hunting if you don't even go hunting. And so he says that's kind of the idea there. But then he goes on to say, and this is where I learned something here that I guess I just never come across before, about the obscurity in the Hebrew. It seems the slothful man, might be better rendered as deceitful or maybe fraudulent. And so Adam Clark says the best sense of the first phrase there is the fraudulent man roasteth not that which he took in hunting. In other words, hunting souls, ill-gotten gain. And that makes a lot of sense with the second phrase there, the substance of a diligent man is precious because he gets it in the right way. So I don't know. If that's the case, then it probably not necessarily best in this subsection, But there is some question on that. It may very well be that slothful is the right rendering. And if so, it's the idea he doesn't roast what he took in hunting because he's so lazy he's not even going hunting. So, of course, he has nothing because he's too lazy even to go out and hunt for it. All right, let's put a peg there, and good Lord willing, we will pick up next week with chapter 13, verse 4. Thank y'all so much for your time and attention.